So, believe it or not, they're taking yet another swing at the Smurfs franchise. Not Sony produced this time, mind you. Even the studio who keep cranking out truly appalling franchises out of Spider-Man movies but without Spider-Man in them, apparently had the foresight to see that they were defeated when it came to the Smurfs. And so now we have, of all people, Paramount and Nickelodeon coming in clutch and having a go at it again. And Rhianna's producing it? What? Because they apparently have money to burn now after almost completely collapsing as a corporation last year. And in true Nickelodeon fashion, they introduced them in the grandest way possible, in between SpongeBob and Patrick's commentary during a football game.
Leonardo DiCaprio, 25. That's about his dating history.
The footage shows them just sitting in the crowd and... yeah, they just look like the Smurfs. I mean, I guess they're just the kind of characters you can't really alter character design-wise. From the little that we do have, though, I think you can see some of that more 2020s minimalistic animation style in there. I'm not exactly saying we're gonna get the Spider-Verse of Smurf movies, per se, but I can already see that more abstract painted look's kicking in there. To be fair, I'd rather that than the silky skin look from the early 2010 movies. And yes, this is all in preparation for what is simply gonna be called the Smurfs Movie. Coming straight out with a definitive article after 3 other wide release movies within the last 15 years. Okay, it's a choice. And this is supposedly not a one and done deal, of course it's not. They have arranged with the Smurfs Belgian owners Peyo Productions, quite appropriately named after the Smurfs creator, to a whole new franchise under them. Sorry Superman, looks like this is the franchise reboot of the year now. Yep, until this first one completely falls in its face, they've got hopes for a whole trilogy out of this thing. And judging by the casting decisions, it doesn't look like they're even really changing the formula from the previous movies. After having Katy Perry as Smurfette in the live-action movies, they're breaking the mold this time by casting, you guessed it, Rhianna. And it's not just the voice for this one, she's also apparently providing original songs for the movie and is also the co-producer of the movie. Now, that's not to say she'll be a terrible producer. I just didn't have Rhianna being a producer on the Smurfs movies on my bingo card for 2025, you know? And if that casting voice decision wasn't delicious enough already, you'll be delighted to discover that they've also included James Corden. Of course they have. Is this just gonna be like a Trolls rival? Is that what they're gunning for somehow? The best omen of any kids movie. That aside, they've managed to get a bizarrely vast collection of people for this. The celebrities crave the Smurfs, apparently, with some of the names being floated around being Nick Offerman, Dan Levy, Amy Sedaris, Nick Kroll, Octavia Spencer, Hannah Waddingham, Sandra Oh, Alex Winter, Billy Lord, Kurt Russell, and John Goodman. They're all reported to be in this movie. However, there are some more interesting notes for the directing talent, as they've got Chris Miller for this one. No, not Christopher Miller of Lord and Miller fame, unfortunately, but this Chris Miller has some other directing credits behind him. This is the guy behind Puss in Boots, but the kind of mid one from 2011, the first one. And before that, Shrek, the third. Or in other words, the 2 weakest entries in Shrek franchise history. So take from that what you will. I can only say it as good news. I cover terrible movies for a job. This is just the latest in continuing to try and milk iconic 80s characters far beyond their peak, and they're not alone. And yes, I know the Smurfs have been around since like the 1950s, but internationally, it was the 80s that was their big break with a cartoon series, so that's what's going down here. It's essentially, I assume, nostalgia created by a celebrity who has the privilege of being in the producer role, you know? This is just Rhianna doing her childhood series again, if I was to guess. I mean, look at the age of everyone involved in this. It's no Timothée Chalamet project. Hey there, thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Come subscribe if you're interested in more animated movie news. I'm a little late to this one, but we're uploading daily, so hopefully I'll catch any relevant trending news as it happens this year. All right, back to the second half of the Smurfs. But looking around at the wider industry and seeing the bottles of time from the 80s coming back, we've also got a stab at a live-action He-Man movie, partly in thanks to Mattel and their mission to make over 40 projects after the success of the Barbie movie, as well as more Ghostbusters content coming out, and who knows, I'm sure My Little Pony has something on their way as well. I wouldn't be surprised at this point. However, as much as this fact just breaks my heart, the failure of Transformers 1 at least may be a sign that the days of repeatedly going back to the wells of 80s IP are coming to an end. Most of the kids who grew up with the original cartoons and toys of these franchises are now in their mid to late 40s. Sorry if that's you. And yes, I'm sure they will still go out and see these kind of movies, but are the kids and teenagers of today that interested? in like the Smurfs? I'm not so sure. The Smurfs themselves have only really had one bona fide hit with the first live action one in 2010 that made $500 million. That's nice, but that's nothing to really sniff at, and that's pretty much its only W, because critically, this movie took a complete nosedive. This thing is standing proud with a 21% Rotten Tomato score, and I can see why. It is sitting on the same lazy format of every 2000s live-action hybrid movie that came before it. I'm talking proper Garfield and Alvin and the Chipmunks level of territory here, which are not your best sources for ripping out the movie plot lines of. You know the drill. Characters from an old cartoon cross over with a live-action comedy actor, mainly known for TV. This time it was Neil Patrick Harris instead of Jason Lee, and cause havoc in their lives. Both parties screaming when they first encounter each other, all usually taking place in New York City or something, which will also feature as the backdrop for the poster. The poster of which will also feature a logo designed to look more urban and down with the kids. There you go, that's the Smurfs 2011. Oh, and don't forget a cool version of the original theme tune in there.
In 3D.
And back to the New York setting, I'm glad we have geography lessons, because otherwise the rest of the world would think America is just New York at this point. Just New York at one end, LA at the other, and everything in the middle is Texas and maybe Washington at the top somewhere. Also, Washington is literally just the White House and the surrounding gardens when it comes to movies. That would be the US if we only had movies to go by. Or a random house in the middle of rural fields that you don't know where is anywhere. But that's essentially the layout, particularly when it comes to iconic cartoon characters go to the big city movies. Unless it wants to be spicy and go to Vegas occasionally. If it wasn't for Hank Azaria putting in an iconically ridiculous performance as Gargamel, this movie would have next to no redeeming qualities, honestly. One of the actual lines in this movie is, "I think I just smurfed in my mouth," and that kind of just sums it up perfectly. And the subsequent movies only suffered more. The Smurfs 2 made significantly less money, and I couldn't really tell you much about it, other than the fact that there are desaturated bad Smurfs in the mix, and Smurfette is in danger of becoming one of them. Plot. Even when they did the first fully animated reboot in 2017, it couldn't crack $200 million. So I guess now we've got a different company trying to do the exact same thing again. To be fair, I'm gonna need to get this idea that 2017 is recent out of my head. It's now 8 years ago. Ugh. But anyway, I think the Smurfs are also just a symptom of perhaps not being characters that particularly cool for a feature-length movie. In their DNA, they are a comic and cartoon series where every week, a ridiculous villain tries to catch them. That's it. It was literally a Hanna-Barbera produced series as well. You know, it's a concept defined by the Saturday morning cartoon. I mean, considering it's Nickelodeon producing this, I'm surprised they haven't pitched a new wave of Smurf cartoons, you know, make it a TV series, keep it at shorts. To be fair, there was one cartoon that was produced in their homeland of Belgium in 2021, of which there is an English dub version, so it's not like they've completely neglected the franchise's roots. It's just, I'm not sure if they can do a feature-length Smurf movie that works. It's certainly not easy to do, and it doesn't create money organically, as we've already seen. It just brings me back to last year's reboot of Garfield, really. Like this movie's now doing, despite the previous movies existing with one literally called Garfield the Movie, they called it The Garfield Movie. And honestly, the way that movie turned out, my feeling is we're gonna get something very similar to this tier of a new movie. A safe family fare that doesn't do much against the formula. You might be able to dig out an older version of the same story covered in its filmography that does it way better, like Garfield having a mum rather than Garfield having a dad, which has way more emotive weight to it than the movie we actually got last year. Or I could just be completely off the mark. I mean, I like Nickelodeon Movie's recent stab at the Ninja Turtles, so maybe we will get the mutant mayhem of the Smurfs franchise. Whatever the case, I currently remain skeptical about this Rhianna-produced James Corden starring Smurfs movie. Somehow in the mid to late 2020s, this just sounds like a 2011 movie pitch. It's nostalgia for people older than us. And nonetheless, it's kind of mad that some Belgian comic characters from the 1950s are still considered valuable property by these studios. Is that showing longevity as an IP or desperation as an industry? You know. I'm not exactly sure what Peyo would have wanted from his characters, but that's exactly what's happening on Nickelodeon anyway. I'll be more excited for the Avatar stuff they're making. Whatever the case, we'll leave the video on that. My name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Where do you think this is going? I can only see copycat worse examples of what they've already made, but give me a pitch. Let's see how you think it would go well. And on that note, I shall see you all in a little bit.